Hello, and welcome to Skirmish Turf. I'll be taking you through a world-building project of mine in which the gods died and all magic was destroyed and replaced with diesel. Yet despite being free from their masters, the slave races that won the war now have to deal with one last cruel trick the gods kept up their sleeve. What curses they placed on the peoples of these lands remained and would be passed down to their children. These unfortunate souls are now the outcasts of society and are simply known as the cursed born. Before I delve into this episode's subject, I have a confession. This is something that some of you might find troubling, but I deem it necessary to disclose. It has been bothering me for quite some time now, and I figured it's something I'd let all of you know. It's a terrible secret I've kept for too long, and now it's time to let it out. Here it goes. I can't draw women. It hurts to say, but it's true. Well, okay, it's not that I can't draw women, it's that I'm not very good at it because I just don't draw female characters often. Not due to any biases, but simply because I don't draw people very often, and when I do, they tend to be either mutants or dudes. A big reason I'm doing this world building project is to try to push out of my comfort zone and try to push what I'm capable of doing artistically. A big part of that is drawing 50% of the world's population. It's a small step. Another thing I want to try is to subvert fantasy and sci-fi tropes and give it a grungy diesel punk makeover. One idea I've had kicking around my head was how to reimagine Amazons. Why does there exist an all-female race of warrior women? What would their culture be like? How did they maintain their population? It was something I thought would be interesting to tackle in Skirmish Turf. Now, to answer the first question, why? As stated in the beginning of this video, the Curseborn are simply individuals who have been vexed by the gods of old. Due to these curses, these individuals have severe mutations that make them freaks in the eyes of normal people. These curses can range from being born with no eyes to having flesh with a similar consistency of ooze. Now, when one looks at the Amazons in Skirmish Turf, one might not assume them to be curseborn at all. In fact, many in the universe agree that the Amazons of Skirmish Turf are quite beautiful. Looks are deceiving, however, and their past reveals a dark and depressing history. For starters, Amazons in Skirmish Turf aren't called Amazons, they're called Haremites. In case the name wasn't obvious enough, they were slave human girls who were forced into the life of a harem to satisfy the sick children of the gods, the dwarves, elves, and orcs. They were cursed with extraordinary beauty and to only ever bear female children. While the dwarves and orcs only occasionally kept harems, the elves were obsessed with them. Ancient text describes all the children of the gods as cruel and self-centered, but the elves were especially hedonistic. The ruins of harem slave pits discovered revealed they could house hundreds of women, with rumors that the High Elven King had hundreds of thousands of haremite slaves. Nothing supports numbers this high, but what is clear is that the haremites were common amongst the elves and their treatment was deplorable. While the exact actions have remained unspoken for quite some time, it's assumed that any act of perversion you can imagine was acted upon. It didn't take much to convince the haremites to join the growing rebellions the thralls were enacting upon their cruel deities. They served a vital role in weakening the opposition's war effort, committing several assassinations of high-ranking generals and destroying important infrastructure. It was a long and brutal battle, but in the end, the slave masters would be slain, and the might of the gods was destroyed. The High Elven King was chained standing up, and his former harem would take turns flaying him with hooked whips. By the end of the war, the only skin left on his body was on his hands and feet. The High Elven King only finally died when the last world tree was destroyed, and the magic that kept him alive vanished. This should have been the end of the mistreatment of the Haremites, but if there's one consistent thing about humanity, it's that we never learn our lesson. While initially they were welcomed into other cultures, that changed within a couple of generations. Due to Haremites being curse-born, they would only have female children, and since they are inherently beautiful, they were often the ones chosen as brides. This meant that, as time went on, their population would gradually overtake the normal human population. Now, if managed, this shouldn't have been a problem, but due to many human cultures being patriarchal in nature, it was made into a problem, and the Haremites were to blame. After a while, many of these women were forbidden from having children or exiled, forced to seek refuge in another town or city. Sometimes this would apply to women who just happened to be beautiful and have bad luck having a male child. While this never got as bad as witch hunts in our time, it was still a shitty way to treat the women who helped bring down the gods. No one saw this mistreatment and was more furious about it than Mother Earth. Mother Earth is a mysterious person. No one knows exactly who she is or where she came from. Mother Earth herself claims to be an Haramite who is cursed with immortality. She claims to be alive since the days of gods and has been able to accurately cite events that happened 2,000 years ago, so most moderate estimations put her age as that. What is clear is she is unnaturally old for a human, is an extremely knowledgeable surgeon, she despises the opposite sex, and is extremely paranoid. What is known about Mother Earth to most historians is that she tried for centuries to cure the Haremites. Her achievements advanced human medicine significantly, but she could never cure the curse. Mother Earth tried everything, from replacing Haramite reproductive organs with a normal woman's organs, artificially planting a male fetus into a Haramite, even performing the first and only sex change in skirmish turf history. It's since been lost to time. The end result was always the same. When done on normal humans, it worked, but when done on Haremites, it always resulted in complete organ failure. This is because it wasn't a biological issue, it was a supernatural one. The reason curses remain in skirmish turf despite magic not existing is because a curse fundamentally changes reality itself to abide to the curse itself regardless of outside input. As her volunteers died and she was lambasted for her failures, Mother Earth realized that it wasn't the Haremites' fault. It was men. It was men who deemed them the problem. It was men who mistreated the Haremites. It was men who casted them away. Why should any woman heed to a world that expects so much of them and gave so little? No, the destiny of the Haremites would lie with Mother Earth. She concocted a plan to raise a nation where her and her fellow Curseborn would live free of the jurisdiction of the rest of the world. She would call this nation Aristasia. For a century, Mother Earth planned on the creation of this nation, using her centuries of political and medical knowledge to pull it off. She lied about her most recent findings and claimed that she could cure the Haremites, and that all she needed was for the many nations of the world to help round up the cursed women onto ships and she would take care of the rest. Mother Earth claimed that this would be a collaborative effort between nations and symbolize peace and prosperity. Due to how high political tensions were at the time, most major nations that housed Haremites agreed, if only to get rid of one problem. By the time any suspicions of Mother Earth's true intentions could be raised, the greatest war since the days of gods broke out. In the world of skirmish turf, it goes by many names, but one of the most commonly agreed upon is the World War of Armageddon. Mother Earth knew the timing to enact her plan couldn't be any more perfect, and when the great nations were at each other's throats, she couldn't be happier. The war distracted everyone from her plans, and the formation of Aristasia could begin. The women who were exiled one last time were soon told the truth. They would be a part of something great. The formation of a country in which they would be free of tyranny, free of abuse, free of men. The strongest and toughest were trained in combat, while everyone else would help build the nation back home. The war provided ample trading opportunities, and soon the Haremites proved to be a force to be feared. Now that begs the question, how does a country entirely made of women maintain a stable population? Well, here comes an awful truth. While most of Mother Earth's research and experiments were focused on women, she also discovered a lot about male anatomy as well. She discovered what made the brain tick, what parts controlled what, and she discovered how little a man needs to serve its purpose. Now we move on to the sinister solution to the male problem, and it's a process known to the Haremites as phlanopization. Phlanopization is the process of taking normal human males and essentially converting them into living sperm dispensers. First, the limbs are removed. Then most features of the face are removed. Eyes, ears, nose, teeth, and lips. Once this has been done, the brain is heavily modified, with most functions being turned off minus the parts responsible for arousal. Then electrical nodes are embedded within these parts of the brain in order to stimulate them. The body is then hooked up to life support machinery and then submerged in a liquid that keeps the body at a low stress level. The mind is all but wiped in this process, and what remains of the man is nothing but a husk of what they used to be. Aristasia is a bizarre culture. They both reject a lot of typical feminine traits, but also embrace them. They will put on makeup not to be prettier, but to appear fiercer and bolder. It's common to wear a dress in Aristasia, but you'll never see them wear heels. I have no idea why women in the real world would ever wear those. They look like medieval torture devices for feet. From the moment they can talk, the Haremites are told that a relationship with a man is the most demeaning thing for a woman, but yet motherhood is an honor and a gift. That, and most Haremites are expected to have a kid at some point in order to maintain their population. When a Haramite turns 20, they're usually required to have a child. Haramites keep extensive records to maintain genetic diversity. Children are usually raised communally, and it's not uncommon for several Haramite women to raise their kids together. A girl growing up in Aristasia won't have one mom, but many mothers. It's a very sweet sight, as long as you ignore the whole philanthropization process. It should go without saying that Aristasia keeps this a closely guarded secret. Their population is taught from a young age that this isn't a necessary evil, it's just necessary and the men deserve it. In order to get males for this, the Haramites are heavily involved in human trafficking all over the globe. In this particular drawing, their cover has been blown, and they need to get to an extraction point before they get killed. As you could probably guess, the Haramites are now despised for their kidnapping of young men and are met with hostility. I just want to say another thing. The Haramites aren't monsters. They do a lot of bad things to a lot of people who don't deserve it, but in the end of the day, they're still people. They're the abused who became abusers, and it's only through a matter of a lot of bad circumstances that the situation was allowed to end up like this. Despite that, though, the Haramites are still people. They have dreams and families they love like everyone else. They aren't allowed to leave Aristasia, but they have amazing standards of living by skirmish turf standards. And additionally, while the roundups were thorough, they weren't complete. There are actually a few Haramites in the world of skirmish turf who, due to having poor family records, have no idea that they're curse-born at all. These women can live normal, fulfilling lives and become normal members of their respected societies. In this piece, however, we focus instead on the more rugged side of Haramite life. These women are going to have to fight like hell to get out of the city. The country they are performing operations in is called Credo. I don't have a whole lot of lore written up for them yet, but just know that their country is very post-Soviet in nature. Now that's my general summary for lore. I'm going to ramble about the art itself now. I had the idea of reimagining Amazons for a while now, even before skirmish turf was a thing. The idea of an all-female faction just seemed interesting, especially in exploring how they function and why a society of only women exists. I wanted to achieve a few things with this drawing, mostly trying to nail the look of the uniform and to depict a smaller scale battle but still make it seem epic and grand. For the uniform, I took inspiration from Greek depictions of Amazons while mixing in a bit of Russian influence and gave it an overall tactical feel. I felt it was important that the Haramites in combat have a uniform that gave them a very feminine figure, but keeping it subdued and still look practical. It's something that needed to be sleek and tight-fitting, but also look comfortable and functional. A big part of this was the helmet. The helmet is based off the Atlan helmet with a few key differences. For one, I exaggerated the catch on top of the helmet to take inspiration from Scythian headgear, which was supposedly an inspiration for the Amazon myth. Additionally, the face was more visible with bulletproof glass used as a shield. Another part of the helmet is the knife sticking out the back. It's meant to resemble women's hairstyles, such as a ponytail. It also serves a practical purpose of signifying rank, with higher rank having more points. The captain on the left has the most amount of points and a samurai pouch full of specialized ammo. It was interesting to consider how their typical urban fighting combat would affect certain elements of their uniform. Instead of boots, they have what are essentially tactical sneakers. It may seem silly, but Spetsnaz fighting in Afghanistan swapped out their boots for shoes to better suit the mountain terrain. I also heavily incorporated straps, mostly because it looked cool. Yeah, in my research I found out that the cool strap harnesses you see on tactical dudes in video games are only worn when in a helicopter. They're usually really uncomfortable and are taking off shortly after landing. I'll just say the straps are there to help disperse equipment weight. Another thing I was surprised when researching is that there really isn't one part of the brain that is responsible for arousal. In fact, sexual stimulation in the brain isn't super well studied. So, for the sake of the world building, I'll just say that Mother Earth somehow discovered how to precisely locate the parts responsible for stimulation, and somehow figured out how to lobotomize the rest of the brain. So, to answer the deep concerns of 1. Bravonium, why is Unk getting milked? Crying emoji, wilting rose emoji, broken heart emoji. It's because the Haramites hate men but need seed to reproduce. Also, I know some of you might find it disturbing, but I'm actually really proud of the lab piece. It isn't shaded, but it has nice angles and manages to be horrifying yet casual, as if this is nothing to these women. Now you might be asking yourself, how the hell has Aristasia not been invaded yet? If all human countries hate them, why haven't they teamed up to take Aristasia down? Well, there's a few things about skirmish turf you need to understand. For starters, no one actually knows where the capital of Aristasia is. Mother Earth spent decades finding the perfect location to build her city, and she made damn sure that no one could find it. Secondly, the Haremites have several hidden colonies around the globe referred to as sororities. While a few have been discovered, it isn't enough to stop the Haremites' operations. Okay, so why don't all the nations band together to find Aristasia? Well, that brings me to reason 3. The geopolitics of skirmish turf are completely fucked. Most major nations have such petty grudges with each other that they would never agree to work together even over a mutually beneficial goal such as stopping the Haremites from kidnapping their young men. In fact, many non-human races will aid Haremites purely out of spite against human countries that have wronged them. The last main reason is that the Haremites aren't enough of a problem to be worth the effort. It simply isn't worth the resources and manpower to find the sorority outpost and get to Aristasia itself. While the Haremites don't have a large army, they're extremely well trained and xenophobic, so it would likely cost a lot of lives to try to defeat them. And while Aristasia does make men disappear, they don't take too heavily from one country to justify further action. In fact, the number of attacks has decreased over the years. The philanthropization process, although horrible, has gotten more efficient over the years. When they first started, a philanthropized male would only last a few months, but in modern skirmish turf, they last up to 5 years, with one that lasted 7. In general, I'm quite proud of this one. I like how the Haremites' uniforms look, and the scene has a good sense of depth to it. I also stepped out of my comfort zone on this one, and not just because I drew women. I usually don't do cityscapes often, so it was interesting to do. The general look I went for Credo architecture is a mix of streamlined, modern, and brutalism. It definitely leans more towards the former than the latter, but if it was too brutalist, then everything would be gray boxes and nobody wants that. Well, unless you have a gray box fetish, fucking sicko. I wanted the city itself to feel oppressive, as if the skyscrapers and buildings are walls keeping its inhabitants in a concrete prison. Cities to me have always had a dystopian feel to them, and I wanted to capture that here, as little of the city as you see. There are some elements I spent a little time on just to get practice for them despite being covered up in the final render, like the grand door or the pedestrians in the alleyway. The alley is meant to be covered with a tarp roof, but it doesn't really show in the final, and I ended up obscuring it towards the end. What I didn't obscure was the special weapons officers and the helicopter. I'm sure you could tell, but I had a lot of fun drawing these. The helicopter is basically what happens when Credo modified a police chopper into an attack helicopter. Yeah, in case you couldn't tell, Credo has a bit of a crime problem, even ignoring the Haremites. The helicopter is mostly based off of a Ka-26, with some elements taken from behind. It's a workhorse helicopter that can both pull people out of dangerous situations and shoot up a den of drug dealers if necessary. The missile pod is modified to instead shoot out flares or beanbags. I was also originally going to make the lights red and blue, but just to spice things up, I made the Credo police use orange and purple lights instead. The special weapons officers that are out of cover are utilizing a lightning gun and a frost thrower. In the world of skirmish turf, ice versions of flamethrowers exist, but are rarely used because they're not as lethal as flamethrowers and their fuel is harder to make. The reason the Haremites use them is because they want to be able to clear out buildings without accidentally burning the whole city down. I experimented a lot with brushes on the frozen cops, but in the end, you can barely see them behind the frost breath. The lightning gun is essentially a taser for vehicles, except with much more devastating results, often destroying internal electronics and paralyzing the crew. I originally had it just shoot out a lightning bolt, but I added a taser wire later to make it feasible. I wish we could shoot lightning out anywhere, but electricity always takes the path of least resistance. I definitely exaggerated the amount of electricity, but I don't care. Lightning is fun to draw and it looks cool. Needless to say, the Credo City Police are not winning this battle. A big part of the Haremite arsenal is the standard issue submachine gun, the Edith 06. Named after its creator and because it's the 6th version of the gun. I designed it by smashing a Star Z70 and an MP7 together. It needed to look extremely sleek and lightweight, but also durable. It uses double-stacked magazines with ammunition similar to the real-life 19x9 Parabellum and has 3 modes of fire: safety, semi-auto, and full auto. Haremite operatives are usually equipped with suppressors as to try to not draw more attention. It can even feed specialized rounds, like denser bullets for armor piercing or incendiary rounds for when you want a fuel source to explode. That's what the captain is loading into her Edith 06. One thing I want to point out is the name of the country, Aristasia. Only a small part of the audience will know where it comes from, but in real life, it was the name of the ideal lesbian separatist utopia created by British feminists in the 60s. Aristasia was also involved in making video video games and BDSM gear, but that's besides the point. The reason I chose it as a name is because it's a name of a hypothetical all-female society that has some basis in real life, and similar to Haremite society, the real-life group had some fascist undertones. Meaning, yes, at one point there existed British, lesbian, BDSM, gamer girl Nazis, because the difference between reality and fiction is that fiction has to be credible. It's a strange rabbit hole to go down, trust me. Also, making up fantasy names is hard, and Aresthesia isn't trademarked, so that's a plus. Another reason the Amazons and Skirmish Turf are like this is because I feel like I need to push a few boundaries. If everything was safe or sanitized in Skirmish Turf, it wouldn't have anything interesting to talk about or share. I want to create a world that is interesting and creates discussion. It's not going to be realistic or even believable all the time, but it will be cool. And what's cooler than an army of tactical badass women? Besides that, I believe in equality. Men are way too representative in the atrocities department, and I think it's time the girls get in on the fun. After all, to quote Red from OSP,
I support women's rights and women's wrongs.
So there you have it, the Amazons of Skirmish Turf, the Haremites. The brave, cursed women who do what it takes to survive in a brutal, grungy, diesel punk world. I hope this video was worth the wait. Rest assured, the time I wasn't spending on making this video, I was doing something very important and not making something very stupid. Another thing I'd like to announce is I now have a Patreon. I debated on creating this for a while, but here it is now. I won't try shoving it into your face constantly, but if you think it's worth checking out, consider donating. Rest assured, there won't be any videos exclusive behind a paywall. I hate it when YouTube recommends those, and you'll be able to enjoy these videos for free. I bid you all farewell, and until next time, stay safe and have a good one.
Is it too much to ask for a little girl boss mummy murder action? I don't think that's too much to ask.
Oh, Red, be careful what you wish for. Be careful what you wish for. Also, before any of you smartasses comment, no motherfucker, I ain't gonna hear you out.